Hello everybody. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about police in schools. In particular, I'm just going to be jumping into the history of why we have police in schools, and then I'm going to be touching on the school to prison pipeline. A lot of the research that I found discusses that pipeline and why there are police in schools and what a lot of the mentality around police in schools is now. So just jumping right in, the history of why we have police in schools, or SROs, which is just a school resource officer. It's the abbreviation for it. So back in 1975, only 1% of schools around the nation actually had a police officer in the school or in their schools, and today 44% of schools around the nation have some kind of SRO or police officer actually in the school. And the reason for this was to actually stop violent crime. The big push was the 1999 Columbine High School shooting, which was just a massacre that woke the nation up into getting more police officers in schools so we could protect our kids. A few more years down the line in 2012 came the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting in Connecticut, which enraged even more people, and the consensus was that we need police officers in schools to protect kids. And Obama actually gave even more funding to the schools to support actually having full-time SROs and police officers in schools at all times to protect against violent crime. So that was just a little bit of the history of why we actually have police officers in schools, but a lot of the mindset on having police officers in schools is changing. A lot of people are now shifting to getting rid of police officers in schools, as it only contributes to the school to prison pipeline. And in its essence, the school to prison pipeline is really simple. Students who go to school, they will go straight to prison. That's pretty much it. You go from school to prison. This isn't saying everybody does. There obviously is a lot more to it, but a lot more people who are in school, it's a lot easier to get to prison from the school, hence the school to prison pipeline. And there's a lot of factors into it, and I'm going to touch on a few of them. So research actually shows that the presence of school police officers increases the likelihood that the school will report common forms of student misbehavior, like cafeteria fights or vandalism, to law enforcement agencies, which contributes to the school to prison pipeline. The reason for that is they're criminalizing such basic misbehaviors or misconduct, that is, getting the police involved, when the police don't need to be involved for such misconduct or misbehaviors. There are other ways to go about it, rehabilitative things, programs. Not all kids are the same. A lot of kids are going through their own things. They are teenagers. They're growing up. Things happen mentally for teenagers, and a lot of things are changing, so there's bound to be lash outs, and the way of handling it is not arresting them and putting them into a prison. That's not going to take care of the problem. There are underlying problems that police just are not equipped to handle. The reason for having police in schools was to protect against violent crime, which they do. They get rid of drugs out of the schools. They do take care of violent fights, students who have violent tendencies. This isn't to say that there aren't some students who don't need to be arrested. It's just an overwhelming majority of students are for basic misbehavior or misconduct. But police officers aren't trained to handle students. They aren't guidance figures, and that's a big reason why people want to get them out of the schools, is because police officers were put there to protect the schools, not guide teenagers. Now, that isn't to say that they can't receive training to guide teenagers and give them help in certain programs instead of just arresting them. But as of right now, police officers don't have that training. They don't do any kind of guidance towards high schoolers or younger. So as of right now, students are just getting arrested and then sent to prison or jail. But a lot of the research I did was actually around Massachusetts. I used the CFJJ, which is the Citizens for Juvenile Justice, which is based in Massachusetts. So a lot of the statistics I found were based for Massachusetts, but it can be shown nationally as well, that a lot of these statistics are similar, but I just wanted to point out that my information is specific to the state of Massachusetts. So interestingly enough, the school to prison pipeline is described as two different pipelines by the CFJJ. The first pipeline is suspension and expulsions. So around 72% of school suspensions are for minor infractions, but these frequent suspensions and expulsions that remove students from their classroom and disconnect them from their school community leads them to get outside of the school, which once they're out, there's a greater risk of the justice system getting involved. Youth are actually twice more likely to get arrested during the periods where they are suspended or expelled from school. So that's one way, that's the first pipeline of how they get into prisons from being out of the school. But the second pipeline is arrests that are taking place inside the school. Students are arrested in school for behaviors that are better resolved through alternative approaches, leading to system involvement rather than addressing the underlying needs of the students, like I was talking about earlier, which leads them to getting arrested in the school and then eventually taken into prison. Another interesting fact that I found while researching the school to prison pipeline was just about how much there are disparities in the school to prison pipeline. Black students and Latino students are 3 times to 2.5 more times as likely to get suspended as their white peers, which means they are getting arrested at a higher amount because they are out of the system a lot more often than white students. And the same can be said for the arrest in school. But it's also interesting to note that a lot of the schools where colored communities live actually have a lot more police in their schools. So there are some disparities based on the history of just how America rised up, how things have been handled in the past. It's just interesting to note how those disparities do still play out, even in schools. As much as the disparity would only be believed as to be being out on the streets and only with adults, it's not necessarily the case. This disparity is still strong with students, and it does play a big impact on their life as they go from school to the prison. But a lot of this was a failure on the juvenile justice system, which could be an entire video on itself. I didn't really want to touch on that, but in the end, the only way they're actually getting to prison is because of the juvenile justice system. They are still being charged as juveniles. So knowing that this is just a failure on the juvenile justice system, things can definitely change. But I just thought it was interesting that the perspective on people wanting cops out of schools now, because of the disparities, because of how they make kids feel, because they aren't really trained to actually help kids for what they need during their high school years, is really interesting. I personally think we should have police officers in schools. I think taking the time to train them on better ways to handle student outbreaks or outbursts would be better than just completely removing cops from schools. But I could definitely understand why a lot of people are in the mindset of removing police from schools. But that is all I have for today. I hope you guys learned something, and I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you all in the next one.